All right, let's go ahead and let's get started talking about the American Revolution. Now, when we discuss the American Revolution, in my classes anyways, I don't go into super details about every battle simply because we don't have enough time. The premise of looking at this war is to look at the overarching issues and problems and how does it add to the narrative of early American history. What did we learn from it? How did we get to this place? And so let's start and let's discuss this. So first we are going to look at the Declaration of Independence. Now on July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress is going to adopt a resolution, and 2 days later, on July 4th, Congress is going to approve the Declaration of Independence. And the next slide shows you. Here is the Declaration of Independence with all of the signatures with John Hancock. You can't miss his name, which is done on purpose. And so by November of 1777, Congress is going to adopt a new plan. Well, I shouldn't say new plan, a plan for union, and this is going to be known as the Articles of Confederation. Now, Thomas Jefferson, who is 33 years old, is going to write the majority of the Declaration with help from Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, and this is really when we start the beginnings of the war. Now, when you look at the American Revolution War, it's broken into 3 phases. You have phase 1, 2, and 3. The first phase is regarding New England. The second phase is about the Mid-Atlantic region, and the third is the South. So it begins really in the Boston, New England area, and then it slowly moves down the coast. And so let's go ahead and let's get started. So we're going to talk about phase 1. So phase 1, as I said, involves New England. And what we're really going to focus on, is we're going to look at the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, the Battle of Bunker Hill actually did not happen on Bunker Hill. It actually happened on Breed's Hill. That's the actual site of the Battle of Bunker Hill, which you can see in the map to the right. It's going to happen on June 17th, 1775, and both sides are going to lose men, but the British is going to suffer more losses. Now, the British vastly underestimated this war, simply because they thought it was an isolated event within Boston, because historically, all of the colonies kept to themselves. They were never speaking to each other. They saw themselves as almost as separate settlements, almost separate countries, but still owned by Great Britain. And so the British never thought that they would be talking with each other and organizing as they had been for years up until this war. The British are going to determine that Boston is going to be a poor place to fight, as it was the center of the most anti-British part of the colonies, such as the Boston Tea Party and whatnot. And so they knew that it was going to be difficult to defend as it was isolated and surrounded, speaking about Boston. And so the British are going to evacuate Boston for Nova Scotia on March 17th, 1776. Now remember, the British thought that the colonists were a joke. And like I said, it was a local problem. However, they're quickly going to realize it's not during this phase of the war. And here's all of the information, a lot of the information I just spoke about, but I wanted to put it in the PowerPoint in case you would like it for your notes as well. So let's talk about phase 2. Phase 2 involves the Mid-Atlantic region. In the summer of 1776, hundreds of British ships arrived with 32,000 soldiers in New York under General William Howe. He offered Congress a choice: surrender with a royal pardon or face a battle against overwhelming odds. And Washington could muster up around 19,000 soldiers with no navy. However, the British are going to drive the colonists out of Manhattan and Long Island and slowly out of the plains of New Jersey, across the Delaware River, and into Pennsylvania. However, the British are going to eventually lose New York to the colonists. So, securing aid from abroad. Who is our white and shining armor? Well, it's our motherland's greatest enemy, and that's going to be France. France is going to provide the colonists with supplies and military assistance. Now remember, France wanted to decrease the British Empire within the New World, so the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Well, this is the feeling within the second phase with France. And lastly, the final phase is going to be the South. And so the British are going to turn to enlisting colonists who are loyal to the crown, which is going to fail. These people who are loyal to the British crown are what's known as loyalists, and they make up around a third of the population of the colonies. The British are going to capture Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and Camden, South Carolina. While the colonists are going to have victories in the Carolinas in 1781, and then they're going to drive Cornwallis to Yorktown and meet him there, where he is going to surrender on October 17th, 1781. And so the treaty, we're going to have a treaty that is going to outline peace on September 3rd, 1783, which is going to outline territory of North America to this new nation that we now are. We are now no longer 13 colonies. And it's also going to create the southern boundary of Canada to the northern boundary of Florida. That's going to be what is comprised of now this new country. So now that we've talked about phase 3 of the American Revolution, we're going to really look into what was the war comprised of. What did society look like? There's really two big groups of people that are not discussed during the American Revolution, and that is going to be the African Americans and the Native Americans. Now this is all information that I just said about phase 3 for your notes. Feel free to keep that for you when you're study. So war in society. Now some slaves, the war for independence meant freedom. However, for others, it's going to mean a harsher lifestyle as white slave owners feared a slave rebellion. Now, Pennsylvania is going to be the first state to have slavery illegal in 1780 because of fierce anti-slavery laws, because a lot of their population is comprised of Quakers. Now, by the end of the American Revolution, all northern states, but New York and New Jersey, abolished slavery. Well, actually, they actually all, except for those 2 days, abolished before the end of the war. However, after the war, New York is going to make slavery legal in 1799, and New Jersey will do it in 1804. Now, the American War is also going to reveal tensions between the nation's commitment to liberty and its commitment to slavery as well, which is going to be an issue we're going to further discuss. Now, we also need to discuss the Native Americans and the American Revolution. Now, the tribes are going to generally stay out of the war. The war generally weakened the position of Native Americans in several ways. The victory is going to increase this lust and this demand of the white population and their love for going out west, taking lands that they think are unclaimed in their eyes, because they're not claimed by the United States or they're not claimed by any of those who were in power, like the British monarchy. And lastly, we need to discuss are women. With men going off and fighting, women were left to take care of the farms, businesses, and some women actually went with their men to war, either being a female camp follower, such as doing cooking, laundering, nurse, and other tasks. Some women were prostitutes. Some women disguised themselves as men so they could fight alongside their husbands, their brothers, their sons. There is evidence to that as well. Now, without the involvement of the British Empire post-American Revolution War, enterprising American merchants began to develop new commercial networks in the Caribbean and South America, and by the 1780s, they're going to start a trade relationship with Asia. Very exciting time in the United States. leading into the 19th century. Now, when you talk about the American Revolution, we need to really discuss the creation of these state governments. So let's look at the first state constitutions. Now, Connecticut and Rhode Island are going to be the first. All constitutions are going to be written down simply because England had a constitution, but it was never written down, and so it was very easy for it to be twisted and manipulated to whoever was in power. Since it wasn't written down, they didn't have a hard copy where they could point to and say, no, this is unconstitutional. And so you'll find this a lot with the former British colonists, that they'll take the aspects of the British government that they like, and they'll use it, and then the aspects that they don't like, they'll twist into something that is more suitable to how they want the government to be. Now, all constitutions are going to have an executive. However, they're going to vary from state to state on the amount of power that he would have. Most states inserted provisions limiting the power of governors over appointments, reducing or eliminating the right to veto bills, and preventing them from dismissing the legislature. Also, every state forbid the governor or any other executive officer from holding a seat in the legislature, making sure that the executive and legislative branches remain separate. So the same person could not hold seats or hold jobs in two branches of the government, because that would be too much power. They did not want that. They had seen how that can be abused. So they did not want, they were trying to protect themselves. So states are going to continue to revise their governments. The process of writing the Constitution or rewriting it is just going to be ongoing. And they're also going to strengthen the power of the executive. And so now, after the Civil War, not Civil War, the American Revolution, you're going to see that there is this toleration of slavery, but it's really going to start to pull the North and the South apart because they view it in different modes. All right, so let's continue on. So we just spoke about state governments. Now we're going to look at the Articles of Confederation, which is going to be adopted in 1777. So Congress is going to remain the only central institution of national authority. And so the powers of Congress, well, they have the authority to conduct wars and foreign relations and to appropriate, borrow, and issue money. However, they could not regulate trade. They could not regulate trade, draft troops, or levy taxes directly on people. And it lacked powers to deal with interstate issues or to enforce its will on those states. Now, it's going to be ratified by all 13 states, but it's not going to happen until March 1st, 1781. The Articles created a loose confederation of sovereign states and a weak central government, leaving most of the power with the state governments. So there is this need for a stronger federal government soon, which is going to become apparent and eventually lead to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Now, with the Peace Treaty of 1783, there's going to be some diplomatic failures with Great Britain. Troops are going to occupy a string of frontier posts along the Great Lakes within the U.S., and the British have not returned slaves that they received from American slave owners. And there's also this dispute of boundaries. Americans wanted complete access to British markets, and the British refused to send someone to the U.S. to talk about these negotiations. So our relationship with Great Britain is pretty strained at this moment. You can understand. So this Peace Treaty of 1783, which I just discussed, parts of the failures of it, I wanted to show you this picture because it shows who was involved in it. We met with Great Britain in Paris, there's always a neutral ground for these peace talks. You're going to have Richard Oswald. You're going to have Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, John Adams. However, as I just said, there's going to be some failures to it that are just going to have to be negotiated later on as we continue to foster our relationship with Great Britain. So the next topic I want to discuss is the Ordinance of 1784. Now let's continue to talk about some other issues that are really the Americans are involved with, and that is really going to be situated around the Ordinance of 1784. So this is based on the proposal by Thomas Jefferson. It's going to divide the territory into 10 self-governing districts, and Congress is going to create a system for surveying and selling these western lands. Now, it is important to realize that these 10 self-governing districts, each of these could petition Congress for statehood when its population equaled the number of free inhabitants of the smallest existing state. So this ordinance is going to be tricky in the coming years of dividing up this land. And just whose territory is this? Well, it depends on who you ask. And this further leads into, well, our relationship with Native Americans are going to be interesting. Now that we are a free country, we try to foster those relationships. But remember, those feelings that Great Britain had towards these Native Americans as being savage, those feelings don't just go away. These now Americans still have the culture of being English and the thinking of being English. And so our relationship with the Native Americans isn't really going to change that much. Now, the U.S. is going to be signing treaties with the Native Americans to cede their lands to us. However, the Native Americans didn't really put these treaties into practice simply because it was normally the chief that would sign these treaties, right? Does that mean all of his people agree to this treaty that they're signing? Absolutely not. It's the same thing as if these now new Americans after the War for Independence, do they all agree on everything? Absolutely not. People are people. They're all going to have different perspectives and different opinions. And so it's going to be extremely difficult for these families and individuals who travel out west thinking that they're bought this land, and they're going to be subjected to a huge amount of violence from Native Americans. And we meaning the Americans, are going to subject violence to the Native Americans as well. The Native Americans aren't the only ones that are being violent and horrific to the Americans. The Americans are being violent and horrific to the natives as well. And so this is going to be a really rough patch in our relationship with the Native Americans. Is how do you foster this relationship? How do you continue it when you think that you're right and they think that they're right? You have to come to that middle ground and discuss. And sadly, at this point in time, no one is really able to do that. We attempt to, but it doesn't really last. It's kind of like a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. All right. There's lots of growth that really needs to happen during this relationship, and we're going to see that within the coming PowerPoints. Within this relationship. So keep that in mind as we discuss after the American Revolution. Really, what does our relationship with not only each other, with all of the other now states, but how does our relationship change with France, with Great Britain, with Spain, and with the Native Americans, and with slaves as well? That's going to be a huge relationship that's going to drastically change after the War of Independence, which is very exciting to look at and to examine through primary sources and through reading and watching videos and documentaries on these subjects. So just keep that in mind as we continue on to look at the bigger overarching picture of our history.